A religious leader is killed in the Middle East. Within hours, oil prices react. Global powers issue warnings. Indian political parties respond, and in parts of India, protests erupt. This time, it was after the killing of Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. But here's the deeper question: how does a Middle Eastern crisis reshape Indian politics? And why do foreign leaders sometimes evoke stronger street emotion than domestic tragedies? Tonight, we examine geopolitics, identity, and uncomfortable contrasts in a series of three episodes. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wide Angle. Every global conflict today seems to demand one thing from countries around the world: choose a side. But there is one major power that repeatedly refuses. Why does India keep balancing between rival blocs while the world grows more polarized? Why does India refuse to take clear sides in some of the world's biggest geopolitical conflicts? At a first glance, it may look like neutrality, but beneath the surface lies a far more complex strategic calculation. In tonight's episode, we look at India's balancing act, how much neutral or cornered it is. India depends on energy from one region, maintains security partnerships with another, and hosts one of the world's largest global diasporas spread across competing power centers. So, when global tensions rise, New Delhi often walks a diplomatic tightrope, balancing interests, pressures, and national priorities. To understand this strategy, we need to look beyond the headlines and examine the deeper geopolitical realities shaping India's decisions. We would corroborate our video with some graphical slides which will give you a better understanding of the situation. The West Asia is not just another conflict zone, it is India's energy artery, its remittance lifeline, its strategic chessboard. Over 80% of India's crude oil is imported. A significant portion flows from West Asia. Nearly 8 to 9 million Indians live and work in Gulf nations. Remittances from that region contribute tens of billions of dollars annually to India's economy. So when Middle East trembles, India doesn't just observe, it calculates. India today maintains working relationships with Israel for defense and technology cooperation, with Iran for strategic access to Chabahar port, with Saudi Arabia and UAE for energy and investment, and finally the United States strategic alignment and Indo-Pacific. On paper, this is diplomatic brilliance, but here is the tension. What happens when these relationships pull in opposite directions? If tensions escalate between Iran and Israel, if oil prices spike dramatically, if global powers demand clarity of alignment, neutrality becomes a pressure. India is unfortunately not yet a superpower with enforcement leverage to that extent, but neither is it a passive observer. It has negotiation powers. It must balance quietly because missteps are expensive in today's politics, and India cannot afford to take any misstep. But external balance is only half the story because foreign crises don't remain foreign in the digital age. They travel, they mobilize, they influence domestic narratives, and that's where the real debate begins. The Middle East has been a cauldron of conflict for decades, but the recent escalation has far reaching ramifications. And it's not just about geopolitics or territory, it is about global energy markets, diplomacy, strategic alliances, and domestic politics. In India, this distant conflict has not remained distant. It is influencing political debates, foreign policy thinking, economic planning, and even street protests. Recently, thousands across some Indian states took to the streets after the killing of Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, raising questions about identity, solidarity, and political behavior at home. So today we unpack how the current Middle East crisis is reshaping Indian politics. Then we see what India's role could be in de escalation, why protests erupted following Khamenei's killing, and whether this is identity politics, deeper historical ties, or something else entirely. The recent situation has already raised fears of broader conflict. The killing of the central figure in Iran's political and religious establishment, Ayatollah Khamenei, is unprecedented and has deep strategic consequences. The key areas of Indian politics which has been impacted are mainly four. The first one which has got impacted is India's foreign policy realignment. India traditionally maintained a multi vector policy with both Western powers and Middle Eastern states. Energy strategy, migrant workers, and strategic trade are major pillars of this balance. Any shift, such as overt alignment with one side, risks alienating others. The next one that comes is domestic political narratives. Political parties in India have taken different rhetorical positions. Some opposition parties and leaders have publicly condemned the killing and demanded a stronger government response, calling for protection of Indian workers and a clearer stance. The third and a very important area which has been impacted is the national economy. Even before protests began, disruptions in airspace and rising crude prices due to conflict raise alarms in New Delhi. Since India imports over 80% of its oil, a prolonged Middle East standoff could spike fuel prices, aggravating inflation and fiscal stress. The fourth factor which has been impacted are the security priorities. Global conflict diverts attention, and India, already navigating border tensions with China and terrorism from its western neighbor, must recalibrate its diplomatic and strategic focus. Now, let us look at the long term strategic opportunities which India can have from this situation. The first one, which may look at it, is the diversification of partnerships. India could deepen its ties with powers seeking balance, that is, Russia, the Gulf Cooperation Council states, etc. Then it can have a diplomatic leadership potential, and India can position itself as a non aligned mediator. The third one, which is very important both for economy and for the country as a whole, is the energy strategy evolution. A stronger investment in renewables to reduce Middle East dependency. But there are some long term risks and challenges also. The first one that should be considered is the economic strain, higher fuel prices, and supply chain disruptions. The second one could be the security complications, spillover risks affecting Indian expatriates and businesses. And the third one, which cannot be ignored and is a bit sensitive, is the domestic political polarization. Foreign conflicts can feed into local identity politics. Stay with us, because what we assume is foreign may be closer than what we think. India's relationship with the Middle East is therefore far more complex than simple diplomacy. It is a delicate balance between energy security, economic stability, and strategic partnerships across competing global powers. But geopolitics rarely remains confined to international relations alone. Sometimes global conflicts begin to reshape domestic conversations within countries themselves. And that brings us to the next and perhaps the more complicated question: how do international crises influence political narratives inside India. That is exactly what we explore in the coming episode, that is episode 2. Till the next episode, which will be published the same day, same time next week, this is Partha Banerjee signing off at the wide angle. God bless you.